All right, so we are here with Rob. Hi, Rob.
Hello, how you doing?
Where are you calling us from? Where is this?
I'm actually in Mexico City at the moment. So we're launching in LA, but my fiance is Mexican. So I've been really lucky to have been able to jump back and forth between Los Angeles and Mexico to stay on the same time zone as my team.
Wow,
So in lovely Mexico City.
amazing. So before we talk about B-Money and everything, tell me a bit about your background, the fintech space in general.
Sure. So I have lived in London for about 15 years. I'm Australian, you may be able to tell from the accent. And my background has covered a range of really interesting kind of technical innovation kind of projects. So I've worked in regulated environments in financial services, I've worked in banks. But more recently, I've been focused in the LGBT space. So I was previously the managing director of a company called Gaydar, which has millions of LGBT people connecting across the world. And since then, I've been really interested in the kind of in the space for grown-up LGBT people that is outside of social networking, dating, and media. So I've incubated a startup around access to specialist mental health platforms and these kinds of things. So I've come into fintech with both a combination of kind of regulated and finance experience, but also working in LGBT lifestyle businesses and getting to know their needs in particular.
All right, and tell me about first the U.S. space. There's so many neobanks, especially on this summit. We're seeing some of them targeting specific niche. Why does this specific niche needs a special banking or a special fintech service?
Sure. So if you look at the fintech market, for the most part, it's a user experience layer. They're taking traditional banking services and they are piping it into people's pockets, mobile first, really, really easily. But some of the embedded challenges that the incumbent banks are having, we're starting to see them in the challenger banks. They're trying to serve everybody. And as a result, there's a risk that they don't serve anybody particularly well. So you're seeing this real rise in banks for communities, niches. So, 10th has just announced, which is a digital bank focusing on the Black community. We've got Aspiration, which has done really well around people with a social conscience and purpose. And we're launching B-Money to focus on super serving really deeply the LGBT community who have been left out of the banking system in lots of really interesting ways. So we see the opportunity in the challenger space evolving from just generalist platforms to what we expect to see a lot more of a focus around individual communities, whether they're immigrants, whether they're Mexican Americans, whether they're people of color. And so we're stepping into that space at the right time for the LGBT community.
Amazing. So if you mentioned the community, what are the pains? Lead me through the use cases because there are real pains, I know. So
Yep.
lead us through that journey.
Sure thing. So let me start by saying that the LGBT community is getting larger every generation. So because it's easier to come out, the social and legal landscape is much more supportive. There are about 5.9 million LGBT millennials in the US, and we expect that there could be up to 20 million LGBT Gen Z coming. So this is a large market. Altogether, LGBT people spend about $1 trillion, and that spending is being done with incumbent banks who aren't really aligned with their purpose. So not only are we aiming for a kind of purposeful product, but there are really specific things that add up for LGBT millennials. So let me kind of talk you through a few of them. Number one, our parents don't support us as much. So if you come out to your parents, you're about 40% less likely to get help with your student debt. That means that we carry about 50% additional student debt on average in the US. So that's a really big number. That amounts to about $40 billion worth of additional student debt. Not only that, we want to have kids. 63% of LGBT people want to expand their families, and only 15% want to do it the old-fashioned way, which means that we're going to have to spend money on surrogacies, adoptions, and ways to kind of bring about families. And if you take all of those people that want to have kids, and you assume that maybe 70% are in a couple and 30% want to go it alone, just to have one child each, we'd need to raise almost $32 billion. So we've got these really unique financial situations that we find ourselves that put us further behind. And if you just took these two things and you looked across the entire population, we're about $13,000 behind the average millennial. So we are looking at this as a really challenging and really interesting opportunity space. But if you kind of go one step deeper, the areas that banks are failing us is that if you look at all of the friction that's in the banking system, our lower mortgage approval rates, the difficulty that we face when we try and talk to our banks with openness about our lifestyles, we're about 50% more likely to have to work in retirement. That's absolutely astounding. And the average person that does have to work in retirement as an LGBT person will be working for 7 years. So the banking system is preparing for us, but they're preparing in the wrong ways. We're getting marketing campaigns during Pride season. We're getting rainbows on cards, but what we're not getting is supportive advice that helps us to avoid these pain points and to prepare for our financial futures. Because if we were, we wouldn't be educating this audience about the sheer volume of money that we're going to have to save as a community to have families. Nobody's talking about it. And I think that's the problem that that incumbent banks and platforms that try and help everybody have, which is that it's really difficult to solve everybody's pain points. What's great about the emerging fintech space is that it's actually relatively cheap to enter now. So not only is the market prepared for digital banking, we're in a COVID situation where people don't want to go into banks. Young people don't want to go into a branch. It's an awful experience that people have never really gotten right. And so we're at the right time, but we have an emerging group of Gen Z people who are coming, and unlike millennials, they haven't lived in this kind of with a foot in both worlds. I'm 39, and I remember having to be closeted at work, closeted at school, talking to a financial advisor and pretending that I had a girlfriend. All of these things were in the recent past for me. But I've been really lucky to be able to be part of a community that is being able to live openly. And really, we're the first generation of LGBT people that can live openly. If you look at Generation Z, and there could be 20 million LGBT people in that community, they've never had to experience the kind of low-level homophobia that has existed for my generation. And so they're going to have less patience for banks that don't support them. They're going to have an increasing need. And so we're positioning ourselves at the right time in the right place in order to serve the millennial audience really well as a test case, but get that really right. And then if we roll out to the Gen Z community, where I talked about $32 billion being required for kids amongst millennials, that number goes above $100 billion for the Gen Z community. So we've got real pain points. We have money, we have expectations, and it's time for us to be able to not only live openly, but to have the opportunities to self-actualize and to live fulfilling lives. And the sad thing is that the incumbent banking system hasn't prepared the way. So it's time for us to take that into our own hands.
Unbelievable, really. Like you already answered so much of my questions, and I was just thinking now, you have all these big companies like Facebook and Google, and they were always leading the way into their relation with the community and giving all kinds of benefits. Are you able to partner with them? Are you thinking about, like, because they were the first to see the future and be the future?
Yeah, so this is really interesting for us. So if you look beyond just banking, and LGBT people don't just think about money, they think about how money allows them to live freely and to pursue the lifestyle that they want. So it doesn't just stop at money. There are plenty of specialist services that tailor towards LGBT people. I've launched an LGBT mental health platform, but I have to pay acquisition to Google and Facebook for every queer customer that I want to attract. So in order to bring in an ecosystem where the pink pound queer money is actually all working together to support one another, we believe that we can be the foundation of trust upon which to build a increasing depth of value to our customers. Now, could we partner with Google and Facebook? Absolutely. I think the key thing for me is that the number one thing that our community has is really low levels of trust for institutions, for obvious reasons, and for incumbent banks. So the ideal partners for me are people that LGBT people trust, align with purpose for ourselves, and not only are prepared to sell to us, but are prepared to give something back. Because that's a really big part of our purpose, is to create a world where being LGBT has no bearing on your financial well-being. And so we are talking with we've just signed with Marqeta, who is our banking as a service partner. And as part of those conversations, we want to know how they're going to help our community. So our impact areas and our purpose statements mean that we want to partner with platforms that are interested in investing directly into LGBT community projects that are concerned about the same focus areas as us: financial inclusion for queer people of color, for trans community, investing in LGBT entrepreneurs who are about 10% as likely to be invested in, but we create up to 10 times more jobs if we were all invested upon, as well as other areas that we're trying to focus on that create value for the LGBT community directly. So absolutely can partner with them. I think they would love to work. I would hope that they'd love to work with us because we have the domain knowledge that nobody has. But part of the deal of working with our company is aligning on purpose and value, because that's what our customers want. They're a very discerning group of customers, and it's important for us to get that right.
Amazing. And how soon can you be ready with it? I mean, what are the dates to get this on?
Excellent question. So right now, if you go to www.b-money.com, you can sign up for our alpha and our beta program. We're launching our alpha sometime November, December. We've got a couple of regulatory hoops to jump through with Marqeta, but we're planning to have an alpha product in the market with a small group of people this year. Our beta program goes live sometime Q1 next year, and then we're looking for full launch, focusing city by city, starting sometime kind of the second half of next year. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. We have lots of people coming out of the woodworks trying to find out how they can help us, how they become ambassadors. But if you want financial services that are designed for LGBT people with purpose in mind, then come to B-Money and we can get you registered and sign you up as soon as we launch. We are about to go through a relatively large rebranding exercise. B-Money came about, I think, because of a sense of individualism. What would it be like to be myself? That is a question that is on every LGBT person's mind, not only because we have to ask ourselves that in every room: can I be myself? Is it safe for me to be okay here? But on top of that, we've never really had the opportunity to be openly ourselves and to celebrate that life. And so B-Money was very much focused around an individual mission. However, what we've realized in talking to our customers is that the individual only gets so far without the community support around them. With those 40% lower rates of familial support, we have to bootstrap ourselves. And it is a really common path for LGBT people to get the first major support that they get from their community. So our new brand is going to be repositioned away from just the individual, but really thinking about how the individual gives back to this wider purpose. And I look forward to sharing more information about that with you as part of our alpha launch in November.
Amazing. And I wanted to ask, are you building this as a movement? Are you like, what is the big vision here? Because you say that you'll go city by city. Like, what is the bigger vision here in scale?
Yeah, no, great. We believe we want to build the largest financial and lifestyle business tailored towards LGBT people in the world. And we think we can be worth over $1 billion by the end of the decade. That's achievable for lots of reasons. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. So we know that we can make money not only from interchange. I think interchange only revenue models are dead. Every challenger bank is struggling now that spending, especially discretionary spending, has dropped, to have positive unit economics. So we're actually going out with a membership-based model, as well as looking at how we can get access to other financial services and kind of build affiliate revenue streams. But on top of that, there's a lot of money in the LGBT economy that is being channeled through and profiting companies that don't really care. So our goal is to partner with groups like Gilead, who provide PrEP, which is protection against HIV. There's about $300 million being spent in the US on PrEP right now, and that's just the copay element. That's not the full cost. That's just what Americans are copaying to their insurance companies. So we want to start actually saying, if you're going to pay for that, pay for it with a company that cares about you. And then in part, we're going to give back. We're going to help improve HIV transmission rates. So if you're a member of the Black community, the data says you're about 50-50 likely to contract HIV by the end of your life. But if you're white, that's 1 in 6. So not only do we see banking as part of our foundation, we see access to mortgages, we see access to loans, travel insurance that's not going to be cancelled because you're caught being gay in a country where that's illegal, access to healthcare. And over the top of all of that, we want to be able to create curated lifestyle products for our people, because we've got access to the data, we've got access to the specialist companies that are providing to them. And so we see our vision as being really big. Challenger Bank is a great way for us to define ourselves right now, but it's not the end of the game. You know, our new brand won't have the word money in it because money is not the end game. Lifestyle, supporting our community, and helping them to lead fulfilling lives is the end game, and that's going to require the whole community to come together. It's going to require us to be a bit activist, but also bear in mind that actually our community is looking for a new normal. We've been fighting for a really, really long time. And if you think about where we are right now, we have multiple pandemics happening. We've got systematic racism. We have coronavirus, and there's a massive pandemic about undersaving in the American community. So the great thing about our community is that we have been thriving through pandemics for a really, really long time. We're incredibly resilient. We support one another. And so our vision is to lead a movement that is not about fighting and railing against a system that's not designed for them, but it's about fighting for something, which is fighting for great end of life, the ability to pursue our dreams, the ability to have families when we want them. And it's going to take the whole community to come together to make that dream a reality.
Now you see why so many people wanted to interview you, since you had some PR around, and so you inspired so many people around the world, not just in the US, you know, and people are watching us right now. And this is like the global perspective to put everything. We are a global summit of fintech nations. And you know what's going on in other countries, and you know, like, especially with this community, what is your message to other people who are watching us and getting inspired by you? I mean, some of them are founders and CEOs like you. Some of them come from traditional banks and neobanks and other fintechs. What is the message, you know, that you want to deliver to them? Because I mean, this is pretty unique what you have here, and that's why I was, and the whole team was very excited in interviewing you. And there's so many people like said, how wasn't it possible before? Like why wasn't this in our generation, other generation? You know, why now?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's really, really interesting. I'm going to tell you two things. So firstly, it's only been less than 2 or 3 months since it was made unlawful for Americans to be fired in many states for being LGBT. So we have to think about that stuff. If your routing number gets put into a payroll system and it just says this is B Money, we've outed somebody accidentally. And that could be grounds for them to be fired. So there have been lots of pain points that have made it really, really difficult. But here's the thing. We've realized that the banks aren't going to help us. If you look at Pride spending this year, it fell off a cliff for support for the LGBT community because it's not considered to be as attractive now that we're not marching in parades. So we're seeing data now, and we're seeing the proof in the pudding, which is that really when it comes down to it, investment dries up if it's a nice to have. So we don't believe that we should be asking for handouts. We believe that we should be building an engine that puts money back into the queer economy to help the LGBT people that need it, because we're all going to have to rise together. If you're outside of the States, you know, there are very, very different regulatory environments. There are different legal protections, all those kinds of things. And I wish that was better. It feels in some ways that it's getting harder, but I'm very optimistic because at the end of the day, if you look at both the American model and the European model for attracting rights, in America, companies led the way in a lot of respects, right? They were introducing trans-inclusive healthcare well before anybody cared in the national government. If you look at Europe, it's been led very much by the European Union, in forcing member states to adopt LGBT positive laws. And it's not, and even then that has its faults. If you look at places like Hungary and you look at Poland, there are areas where that regulatory environment is failing. But I'm really hopeful because here's the thing, we're not going anywhere. We are too big a movement now, and it's not even a movement. We're just people trying to live our lives. There's too much leadership out there now for people to ignore us. And I think for people that are working in incumbent banks or challenger banks and feel like this is important to them, here's what I learned. I was miserable working in corporates. I did very well, but ultimately, it was difficult for me to align on purpose. And it was only after I started focusing on LGBT business building that I realized that I have the opportunity to make it easier for the people below me. And I think that is part of what a generation of gay men who had a large proportion of the older generation die through the AIDS crisis we've not had positive role models. We have had many of them, don't get me wrong, but we have a generation of role models that we are supporting and growing now. And so we want to do well by showing the people below us that you can live openly without fear of violence, without fear of being fired. But on top of that, there are multiple different models for managing your family. There are lots of different ways for managing your life. And so we think that we can provide, to some extent, some role modeling by elevating the great news stories from within our own community and giving people something to hope for. And if you're working in an incumbent bank or a challenger bank and you're kind of wondering why they're not doing enough for your community, the reality is that we're often seen as a marketing segment and not a product segment. And so we are looking at this really differently, and we'd love to hear from you because it's a talent war out there. We have big ambitions, and we'd love to hear from people, particularly stateside with banking experience and so on, who want to join the movement, be part of a great team of what is mostly queer millennials solving this problem for ourselves. But look, it's going to get better. It might feel a little bit rough right now, but I think if you kind of look at the wider geopolitical landscape, America pushed us very far in one direction through Obama. We got a lot more kind of liberal attitudes and that kind of thing, and there's been a bit of a snapback. That's really common in change, right? It's really a consistent kind of linear journey, and I have absolute confidence that people will vote in the right way this year, and we'll begin to see more hopeful news coming out of those world leaders that have been absent from the world stage.
Thank you so much also for explaining to me what is the difference between just the gimmick or the real thing, the holistic thing, and what you're trying to build, and explaining all of us what's unique about the product that you're building right now. A lot of people wanted to see this talk, so I'm happy that you drove the message to all people who are watching us. And if they have questions specifically to you, to the team, how do they find out some information?
Come to the BeMoney website, www.be-money.com. Search for BE-money. You'll find us. We're going to be making a lot of noise from November onwards, but start on our website. If you have general inquiries, partnership inquiries, you're interested in investing in this movement, then hit us up. All of the information is in the footer of the website. And if you're a potential customer, you're the mother or father of a queer child and you want to bank with purpose in order to support their future, then sign up on our mailing list and let's talk.
Amazing. Thank you very much, and hope to see you after the beta and talk again.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, and all the best to the conference.
Thank you.